and for that we thank him. He also was the person who had the foresight to record James's live recordings right here in this room. John took a little Sony tape recorder and recorded those seminal recordings that you consider the classics. Those were recorded in this room by John on a little tape recorder and then made to sound beautiful by Scott. So without further ado, these guys are the ones. Please welcome John Parsons and Scott Billington.
Thank you, Jamie, and I'd like to welcome you all here to what would have been James Booker's 77th birthday. Yes, it's true. I recorded him on a Sony, what you would call a ghetto blaster in those days. And the funny thing, they had sort of a hiss in the background, and Scott managed to get the California guy, what's his name, Michael Jackson, sound man, took a $10 million computer to take the hiss out of these recordings.
Oh, we got them sounding pretty good, didn't we?
So we could, yeah, I think they sounded very good, to my knowledge.
Well, I think it must have been 36 or 37 years ago that I first heard James Booker here. The upright piano was right against this wall. And I remember one night in particular, it might have been the best musical performance I'd ever heard anybody do. I think this whole bar levitated and floated over the Mississippi River for a while before it came back down. And after hearing that performance, I approached James and John and asked about making a record. We'd go into the studio with James Booker. And it was quite a journey to get to the record. We had a pre-production plan, and well, you booked him here every Wednesday night, right? With Johnny and James.
No, it was Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay.
Yeah, but that's okay. Yeah, we had him. I had him here with a special group. It was Jimmy Singleton and Johnny Vodakovich, who we just heard played on Tuesdays, and a fantastic horn player,
Red Tyler, Alvin Tyler.
Red Tyler
Yeah.
played the saxophone, incredible, and that was some of the greatest music I've ever heard on any stage, not just this stage. And the record session, Scott had booked the Ultrasonic Studios for 3 days. The first 2 days, Scott don't even want to talk about it. It was, James was lying on the couch, and when you tried to pick him up and physically put him on the piano.
We did. Actually, Red Tyler and I had to go pick him up at one point. He wouldn't talk to anybody. And when he did play, it was kind of intriguing. I actually went back and listened to these tapes a couple of years ago, and we put out a new edition of the Classified record that's got another 8 songs on it. And, well, on those first couple of days, whenever he would start to play something without telling anybody, it wasn't one of the songs that he had intended to record. And by the time Johnny and James and Red figured out what he was doing and locked into a groove with him, he would just go somewhere else, and it was this cat and mouse chase. We did get one beautiful take out of those performances. But I was kind of nervous. I mean, I'd made a few records at that point. I'd won a Grammy with Gatemouth Brown. Now, making records with Gatemouth Brown was a real systematic thing. You had somebody write the horn charts, you rehearsed the rhythm section, you got it sounding good, so Gabe felt inspired, and he had a big enough ego that he would come up there and he would deliver a performance. He wasn't going to let you down. The psychology of recording James Booker was something else. And on those first few days, he barely spoke the whole time. He asked, no, I want Earl King to come down here. I want Cyril Neville to come down here. I want songs. Cyril and Earl showed up at the studio, and he wouldn't talk to them either. Anyway.
So the third night he stayed in my apartment, which was upstairs, right overhead there, and he made many phone calls. He talked to Cyril Neville and several, maybe the other Neville brothers, but I just knew, I had a feeling that day he was going to be ready to go. And as we were driving to the studio that morning, you talked about all this, he wanted songs and stuff. Somebody happened to play Hound Dog by, I think it was Big Mama Thornton on WWOZ radio. And that song is on the album, Classified. he just happened to hear that song driving there. But I just had a feeling that he was going to be ready to go that day. And then the story goes that he sat down and started playing before they could frantically set up a sound.
Well, I actually went to the studio early because I wanted to listen to the 6.5 reels of tape that we'd already burned just to see if there was anything there that might be worth putting out on a record. And I was really getting a little bit nervous, to tell you the truth. And when I got to the studio, there was Booker at the door saying, "Scott, can I play?" I said, "Yeah, man, let's go do it." So yeah, he was ready to play before we had the machine up and running again. And he recorded 12 or 13 or 14 solo piano performances, and then the band came, Red Tyler, James Singleton, Johnny Vodakovich, and we got most of the band performances that are on the record that afternoon. At one point he asked me if I would pay him because he was getting an advance for this record, and at that point it was like, oh my God, we've got a record, yes, here's your check. He went out to the piano bench and started to play a song again, and all of a sudden just slammed his hands down on the keyboard and said, "Hey, what time does the bank close?" And Red Tyler said, "About 3 o'clock, Booker." And he got up and left the studio, and that was the last anybody saw of him for a couple of weeks. But you know, Red Tyler put it in a very succinct way when we finished the session. He said, "Man, you know, recording Booker is like trying to capture the wind." And that's such a great analogy for Booker because it was spontaneous. You never knew where he was going to go. I look back and think sometimes, man, if I had a recording studio back then and just had a standing invitation for Booker to come and play whenever he wanted to, maybe that would have resulted in a truly great record. And Classified, I mean, it has its flaws, but man, I'm glad we got the record made, and it's been so long. We came up with a new edition of it a couple of years ago, and John, I'm really proud to be still standing on the stage with you here.
Yeah,
man.
me too. Me too. Who was James Booker? Well, he was some musician's musician. You can tell a real star when famous people, other famous musicians would often come to hear James Booker here. Who could I name? Jimmy Buffett, Dr. John, always, Fats Domino would come to the gigs. I can tell you one story. Emmylou Harris came to hear him. She was sitting at a table right over there behind the Christmas tree. And she sat there for about an hour and she had this long, beautiful black hair. And she went down like this and just shaking her head for an hour, listening to Booker. And many famous, Michael Bussé of Beausoleil was actually here the last performance James did. And some writers, they like to say, well, I heard James Booker here and there were like 8 or 10 people. Well, there were some nights like that, but actually there was many nights when there were like this, 200 or 300 people here to hear him. And he would average, somewhere around 100 people average. So some of the things you have to correct what they write. It's not always so true. But Michael was here the last concert he gave. And I'd like to welcome Michael. He is actually here. Michael Bussé of Beausoleil. And he can tell you, so he can vouch. Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Well, you know, I only knew James Booker for the last 2 years of his life, and I got an appreciation for him as a human being. He was really smart. Probably the only person I've ever met that I'd say this is what a genius is, and not just in music. But he was a very lonely guy too, and after the session, many times I'd get a collect call, 3 o'clock in the morning, and collect call from James Booker, will you accept the charge? And it's like, oh my God, okay. And it would be Booker. And I remember one time in particular, he said, you know, Scott, the next time you're here in New Orleans, maybe we can go sailing together on Lake Pontchartrain. And I thought, you know, well, this is kind of sweet. Later on, I found out that his friend Thorny Penfield had indeed taken him sailing on Lake Pontchartrain. It was a good memory for him. And And we had a long conversation that night. I was about to go to bed again. The phone rang again. It's a collect call from James Booker. Would you accept the charge? He said, Scott, there's something really important that I forgot to tell you. I said, what was it, James? I said, man, I can't remember. Anyway, he was a sweethearted guy and a very tragic figure for all of the talent that he had, the difficulty that he had in just bonding with people. It was very hard to see sometimes, but what a great honor and experience it was to work with him. So
I'd like to say a few more words when it's very difficult for me to talk about James Booker. I knew him from 76 until he died. I was his manager for most of that time, maybe 78 or 9 till 83. But I bought him a bright new upright piano, I can't remember, but I bought a hall piano and I brought it in here. I took the money from the Jazz Festival tour and I went to Hall Piano and I just gave him $2,000, much to the chagrin of most of my partners. He loved that piano. And after he died, I couldn't listen to piano players for a long time. I never tuned it again. It just sat over there. And it's sort of like when he died, it died with him. So that's it. I forgot.
well, happy birthday, Booker, man.